and welcome to this Scottish Rugby Blog interview with myself, Jack Mysyk. I'm very happy to say I've been joined by former Scotland internationalist and of course former British Lion member Scott Hastings. Thank you for joining me, Scott. How are you today?
Yeah, really good. We're sitting here obviously in your front room, and what a view you've got over Murrayfield Stadium. It's amazing. And I've just been actually running up in Costoffen Woods this morning and recovering from, I suppose, the Calcutta Cup weekend when unfortunately Scotland went down to England again. And the last time they won down there, of course, was in 1983. But there were some very good aspects about that game, and especially on the back of half time at 13 points to 10. All the Scottish supporters in Twickenham were suggesting, hey, why don't we blow the final whistle now?
I'm sure I would have been delighted at that myself. I think I had to pinch myself after about 40 minutes. But anyway, if you'd just like to start by telling us what your thoughts are on the game. Do you feel it was an improvement from the Italy performance?
I think it's difficult to say. I think if you look across all the games that Scotland have played in the Six Nations Championship, I think everybody can identify there is a change in the team. There's a change in the style of rugby they're playing. They're scoring some very, very good tries. I think the thing that's frustrating me more than anything else is the lack of sort of discipline in key areas. And for me, it's all about reducing the penalty account, tidying up the errors I think that we've made. And you referenced the fact that was there improvement from the Italy game. Well, you remember, with 1 minute and 38 seconds still on the clock, Scotland were winning a game of international rugby against Italy. And what needed to happen there was a bit of composure, a bit of leadership, to A, kick the ball out. Peter Horne didn't do that. B, once the ball was kicked out, if it had been kicked out, it was then up to the line out to function well. In other words, you slow it down, you hit your line out at 2, you maul the ball, you drive, you put it to ground, a couple of pick and drives, you kick the ball out and you win a game of international rugby. That's how you close out games. And for me, I'm not seeing that discipline within the team that's allowing Scotland to convert pressure into points and from points into wins. And in many respects, coming into the Irish game, of course, Ireland haven't got a chance of winning the Grand Slam. They have got a chance of the Six Nations Championship title. And what's going to be interesting is that can Scotland put all the sort of disappointments of the season together and try and put an 80-minute performance where they tighten up on those defensive lapses, they ensure that the error count is kept to single figures, and they continue the way they've played, and maybe they'll get something out of this championship.
Right, thank you for that. It's very in-depth. Regarding the match specifically, I mean, to highlight a few key areas, Scotland missed 27 tackles, which in my view is unacceptable at any form of rugby. At school you'd have been castigated for that. And England had 17 clean round breaks to compare to Scotland's 5. I mean, you regard discipline, I mean, a lot of people think of discipline as just penalty count, but as you said, it's far more than that. I thought for once it was actually a miracle, and the bounce of the ball and everything that went on at Twickenham was actually in favour of a Scottish side, which a lot of people would disagree with that. That's happened over the years. But do you think we can continue to allow that sort of indiscrepancy at this level?
No, quite frankly, no. The defence was poor. And this is what I mean about players taking ownership. They've got to tighten up on those aspects of the game. Our defence has been reasonably good throughout the championship. But what I'm finding is that I looked at the holes that were being created. But the funny thing about sport is that if your opposition aren't taking your chances, you're still in a game. And with 10 minutes to go, Scotland were 7 points behind, 20 points to 13. The score was in England's favour. I'd actually forecast the score of a victory for Scotland, 23-20. So who knows if they'd intercepted a ball, scored between the posts and popped over a last minute drop goal. But you're right, England absolutely crucified us. They found easy line breaks, and that was extremely disappointing. And you know, the difficulty I sometimes find as a former player is you do tend to hark back to your own career, but you know, certainly the teams I played on, you prided yourself in your defensive chores, and you know, I was alongside a former Scotland player and now Scotland under-20s coach Sean Lanine, and there was a great rapport between us in terms of our defensive line, but that was set by the whole team. And therefore, it's up to this team now to really, really sort of nail that down. But because let's face it, if England had taken all their opportunities, and let's say Scotland had faced New Zealand in that type of form, that could have been a cricket score. And therefore, it does, perhaps the score masks over the dominance that England had. But it needs to be addressed. And I've always said that the yardstick for this Scotland team is going to be the Rugby World Cup and getting through the quarter-final, but also maybe going beyond that. And maybe this World Cup's just 4 years too young. This team are developing, but I want to see ownership in the team. I want to see our top players, our most experienced players, really, really starting to drive and dominate games. And I'm not seeing man of the match winning performances from a lot of players, but they've got to up that intensity within their game.
It's funny that you actually mentioned Sean Leane, because last month David Ferguson from the Scottish Daily Mail compared yourself and Sean Leane in the centres to as before the injury to Alex Dunbar and Mark Bennett as being the future Scotland pairing. Although I'm a big fan of Matt Scott, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on how viable you think they are as an option going forward to the World Cup.
Yeah, I think they are a great unit, and in particular, young Mark Bennett. I had the honour, I would suggest, of presenting his first cap jersey to him back in November. There, Vern Cotter asked me to come into the change room, speak to the team, and I handed over the jersey. And I've seen Mark grow up, through the ranks, and be part of the Scotland 7 setup. And for me, as well as his talent, he has real heart, real spirit, a real understanding on what makes a modern rugby player tick. And his association in the midfield with Alex Dunbar was going to be a feature, certainly, as you go into the World Cup. But unfortunately, with Alex's injury, he's not going to make the World Cup. He'll just have to focus, get himself fit, and get back into that Glasgow team. But there is an opportunity now for Matt Scott to step in, and Matt, he's lacking match experience because of his injury. But it's now, as one door closes for one player, it opens up for another player. So can Matt Scott force a similar partnership along, with Mark Bennett? And I hope they can do that. And it's all about the linkages and the likes of Finn Russell linking with that unit. How do you bring in Stuart Hogg to be more of an attacking threat? How do you use him as a decoy runner? Then you set about, setting your game plan and setting the standards within your own little unit. So a lot of work to be done in this Scotland team, but one more game, there's a couple of warm-up internationals and then World Cup, and as I said, that's going to be the testing ground for those centre combinations.
Speaking of Mark Bennett, I've got some stats here. Some 4 line breaks in the Italy match alone. He's got 6 offloads, 7 defenders beaten for a debut Six Nations. That's quite an impressive effort from a man who's so young. What other players have impressed you so far in the tournament and in various areas?
I think Stuart Hogg certainly, impressed him. We know his attacking threat. I like the way that Finn Russell carries the ball close to that gain line as well. And, a lot of people thought that the decision was wrong when, first of all, he got a yellow card in the match against Italy, and then it was not against Italy, I should say, it was against Wales, of course, and then it was turned to a red card. But what you got to understand, the laws of the game are, if you tip a player, whether it be in a tackle, in mid-air, or in a line out, and he goes round the horizontal past the 90 degrees, it's up to the player who makes the contact to get him safely to the ground. But that aside, Finn Russell does certainly impress me. It's been great to see Sam Hidalgo-Klein in the setup. The challenge being is that when you're only getting 2 or 3 minutes at the end of a game, he's not going to be impressed. So, again, I would just suggest it's a stepping stone process. Blair Cowan's played well. I like the way that Rob Harley goes around his work. And you gain your confidence as an international rugby player from winning. And unfortunately, this team aren't winning. And until they start winning and getting that winning feeling, we're not really going to turn the corner until that happens.
Right, you mentioned a lot of Glasgow players there. Obviously, Glasgow have had a very impressive last 18 months under Gregor Townsend. I mean, they're rightly top of the Pro 12. They've got a real winning mentality about them, something that we haven't seen in Scottish rugby. And to have such a core group of Glasgow players excelling, to me, it seems quite strange how a team, obviously there's a difference between club and international level, but how can a team of key players that play week in, week out, why are they not grinding out the wins that they do in the Pro 12 at the international level?
because international rugby is bloody tough. Simple as that. And you're having to gel different teams, different methods, different defence. You've got to appreciate the step up in international rugby is hugely different. It's a faster game, and it's how you deal with that speed and that intensity. And you're working, at periods of time with different players, so you've got to adapt accordingly. And it's hard because it's tough on those players. That you're looking at the form of Glasgow to be replicated, and sometimes it's not easy to keep pushing that bar up. But as I said, it's purely the fact international rugby is a different beast altogether. And somebody was asking me, did I think that Ireland was going to win the Grand Slam? I said no, because Grand Slams are bloody hard to win as well, and you really, it's incredible the pressure that mounts on you, and I just felt that the home advantage of Wales, and that they kind of outplayed and outthought Ireland. Ireland, very good team, came back very, very strongly. But when you look at the week before or 2 weeks before, when Ireland completely dominated an England team, it just goes to show that with the breaks and with all the analysis that's been done in the game, teams really have to be at their top form if they're going to win championships, if they're going to win Grand Slams, and they are currently hard to do. But I suppose you look at one direction, and that's New Zealand, who are able to do it consistently now when the pressure is on. And it's up to players to understand that international rugby is a place of pressure. And I've been there, I've made mistakes, I've had drubbings, I've had great wins. So I understand the process. The simple fact is that you just have to understand that at all times it needs your 100% focus.
That's brilliant, great answer. Moving on to the mentality of the Scottish game. When one of the writers on the blog, Andy McClellan, made a fantastic article about how it was very much highlighted in the Italy game, how there was a distinct lack of leadership on the field for the last 20 minutes. You could feel it in the stadium. There was a tension. As the game went on, the tighter it got, it really started to show that Italy were the team with the momentum. Do you think that there's a real problem with a natural leader in the squad? I mean, if you look at the other Six Nations teams, there's Ducertois, O'Connell, Warburton, Robshaw. These are all proven leaders. There was a stat in the England game, Robshaw's finished the last 18 tests, where I don't think Laidlaw's completed a match this tournament so far. What are your thoughts on the leadership problem?
Yeah, it's really hard, because I do admire Greg Laidlaw. I like him as a player. There's a bit of criticism against him. He doesn't sub himself. That's Vern Cotter who does that. And against Italy, I think I was hugely surprised at that substitution. Yeah, the game is about leaders, and I played with experienced players when I first got my cap, and those leaders were the more experienced players, and they led you in the game. They taught you how to play international rugby, and I suppose in some respects I became that type of leader as well when I was in as a senior player. And I don't know if there's that empowerment within the game now that allows that process to happen. And ultimately, because it's such a professional game, it's the coaches that have perhaps more of a say. And what I would like to see is, I think Vern Cotter, first and foremost, is a very, very good coach. I do believe, because Scotland are not used to winning, it's hard for these players, especially when they've made errors, they've come off a back of a very poor championship, and but when you delve down, there's been a lot of positive things, and sometimes you just have to focus on those positives and just take that out. But one day this team will get a break, and in front of their home audience, which is going to be the game on Saturday against Ireland, perhaps that's the time where Scotland will come to the fore and win that final game, and suddenly sign off the championship on a positive high. And fingers crossed that this team can do that. But for me, it's up to the senior players to try and lead, to try and stimulate that reaction, that desire for the win, but also a composure to win as well.
Looking forward to that Ireland game, there's areas of improvement that are necessary, and as you said, Ireland are a fantastic team. I mean, their breakdown work alone is exceptional. I would say they're arguably the best team in the Northern Hemisphere at it. Bearing in mind Wales gave them a really good battle in there at the weekend. if there's three aspects you could concentrate on if you're Vern Cotter looking to the Ireland game, what three would you pick?
First and foremost, I would pick territory. I'm a great believer in international rugby. You have to play in the opposition half. And I appreciate you can move the ball around wherever you want. When there's an option to move it from your 22, that's fine. But you cannot play rugby like that for 80 minutes. You have to play with a bit of territory. So that's number one. Number two is our kicking game. Our kicking game is very poor. If you look back to our chase kick and our kick retention, it's very poor. And I think if you look towards Ireland and Wales, they kick with an intention to get the ball back. Again, I've talked earlier in this blog about, the difficulty you have as a former player is you sort of look back and you compare yourself and your era and your teams. But there were times when my brother was playing full back that we knew if he was kicking a ball, we knew exactly where that kick was going to be. We knew what was going to happen when he received the ball in certain parts of the field. And I don't think that planning and strategy is happening. The third thing I would put to the team is continue what you've been doing. They've played some good rugby. They've scored some great tries. They were getting thumped at Twickenham there. There's 80,000 people down there. And they're getting thumped and they're already behind. But they came back and they showed that they could do it. And they came in at half-time at 13 points to 10. What happened in the second half was that England just put them under so much pressure. So taking all the good things, that would be my third thing. Keep doing what you're doing well and improve on the things that you've not been doing well, i.e. tackle, defensive, errors, eliminate them all. So that's a quite succinct answer. I'm not a coach myself, and we've all got an opinion, and everybody who's listened to this blog will have an opinion about certain things. But I think what I like to see is players making good decisions on the pitch, because the crowd will react to that, and the crowd can become important on Saturday. And it's a great stadium, it's a great championship. It's not been the best championship. We've not seen free-flowing rugby, and anybody watching that France-Italy game yesterday, that was poor fare. But it's like a nil-all game of football. These types of games do happen. You're not going to get a cracker every time, but it's Super Saturday this Saturday, and it's going to be a lot of fun because there's three teams still in the championship, and there's going to be some very, very combative performances from those who've fallen out of the championship that perhaps will have a say in where that championship goes.
Well, certainly, as long as it's better than that France-Italy game, I'm sure we'll all be absolutely delighted. Hate to put an air of pessimism, but there's been a lot of mentions on the blog about certain players who have not lived up to their hype in this championship, or who have disappointed, is probably a better word. Is there anyone in particular, or certain players who you would have expected more from coming into this championship?
It's really hard to sort of point the finger, at individual players. I think it's the simple fact that players at times have made mistakes. And when a player makes a mistake in a team game, it's really important that the other players, respond accordingly. And I always remember a great story going round the New Zealand camp, which there was a letter received before the Rugby World Cup final between New Zealand and South Africa. The letter went into the New Zealand camp, and obviously Jonah Lomu had made his an incredible impact. And the letter went along the lines of, remember, rugby is a 15-man game. Make sure 14 of you pass the ball to Jonah Lomu. We don't have a star player like that, but we've got to understand that it's a team game. And no, I'm not going to point at players and say no, they've not responded, because there's not an awful lot of other options out there. Remember, we only run 2 professional teams. Some of our players ply their trade down in England, and England have got an abundance of resources. It's a far more widely played game. They've got the Premiership clubs, the Championship clubs to choose from. There's a lot of experience there, and from that they're able to pull from resources. But on the other hand, if you look at a very small population of 3.5 million, well, that's New Zealand. We're a country of 5.2 million. So for Scottish rugby, it's about understanding that the pride that's within the jersey, the understanding that when you perform in a Scotland jersey and you get a win, what a feeling it is, and at times life can be tough, but sometimes when life is tough, you've got to produce a performance. So as I said, without pointing fingers at players, it's for me the acid test is going to be Rugby World Cup and having a real crack at that and putting some credibility back into the Scottish game.
Well, I completely agree with you on that point. It is a team game, so it's harsh to outline anyone in particular. Looking at the other side of the coin, is there anyone who you would like to see feature who hasn't really had a chance so far in the final match? Because you could argue that it's a bit of a write-off. It's hard to say that about any Six Nations game, but do you feel there's anyone who's on the periphery of the squad maybe who deserves a shot?
Very, very hard question that, and I've been following the likes of Glasgow and Edinburgh. In Edinburgh, there's been a subtle improvement within their performances during the Six Nations, although they let a game against Ulster and Cardiff Blues slip away. And Glasgow, on the other hand, have done likewise. Great to see Chris Fusaro back, for example. Hamish Watson's done reasonably well. And it's very difficult to sort of understand. Maybe it's time to give Sam Hidalgo-Clyne a start. He does goal kick as well, but let's test him out. And I think give him a real opportunity. The fact there's been quite a few changes and there's quite a few injuries. It's all about these players. I think they could still do something. They've shown that if they can attack teams, they can score tries. So maybe Sam Hidalgo-Clyne in that sort of front row area would be worthwhile. But there's going to, in a few years' time, there's going to be a few of the younger players knocking on the doorstep, and Stuart McInally for me is one who is one for the future, who's moved from the back row to the front row. He's very combative, and I can see him coming to the fore as well. Too early for him to be exposed to international rugby, but there's one from Edinburgh or two from Edinburgh to say, maybe throw them in and give them a go.
Yeah, well, I have also been really impressed with McInally's performances. A former George Watson's pupil like yourself, they have actually been producing quite a number of players coming through the ranks, and so have all the Edinburgh schools, really. I noticed you were commentating on the under-20s match where at the Scotland-England game down in Darlington, and there were a lot of very impressive performances, a very combative, very dogged performance, I'd say, from Scotland, who in the past have been used to a few thumpings, truth be told. But was there anyone who really stood out for you from the match, the under-20s game? Boy, Jenkins at fly half was pretty useful. I was also going to say Magnus Bradbury was outstanding at number 8. Ben Robins on the wing. There was a lot of positive performances. And speaking to Sean Lanine, incidentally, after the game, they lost 11 points to 26 against a very, very good England side. But I said at the time on Sky Sports that I felt that Scotland would take far more from that game than England would do. So again, stepping stone process. This team have got one final game in their under-20s championship, but also I'll be out in Italy, the north of Italy, for the World Rugby Junior World Championship out there. So I'd like to see them, continue on that vein of form. So Magnus Bradbury was certainly outstanding at 8, and it was again very, very good team performance. So that would go well. Just one final thing, actually, that I perhaps failed to mention in my previous question was the one international player who's played at Sevens is Roddy Grant, who plays at Edinburgh, and he's not really, he's been outstanding and deserves a cap. But like all these players, a cap has to be earned, and you have to get the vote and the confidence going. So, to the youngsters at under 20 level, they must aspire to being better players than their opposite numbers, because ultimately, I was never the best player who played for Scotland, but I aspire to being a better player, and as long as that ambition remains within, that ultimately they haven't made it just because they're playing for under 20s, just because they have a professional contract. You've got to set your sights, higher than that. You've got to set them sights. I want to be a winning Scotsman and get into that national team and start winning for Scotland. So that's really, really important. The next few years for Scottish rugby is going to be really interesting because there's a lot of players coming through. Glasgow and Edinburgh are developing well. The 4 academy structures are being put in place.
the playing structure needs to be sorted out, because there needs to be an outlet for those younger players to play their game. Now, whether that's in a semi-professional capacity, whether they can break through to their 2 pro teams, whether London Scottish becomes part of the development process, where Scottish Rugby maybe invest as a funding partner into London Scottish because they're playing in the Championship. And if you've got a team sitting in the Championship that are one step away from getting promoted into the Viva Premiership, then perhaps that's worth having a look at. So a lot of things going on in the background for Scottish Rugby, and a lot of development, a lot of strength and conditioning, and it's just a matter of just if the public can be patient, I think Scottish Rugby in the next few years can make an improvement, but at the heart of that is the players' attitude and players responding on the pitch. And
building on the sort of outlet for young players, I mean, right now I think that one of the key outlets is the 7 squad, where you've seen guys in recent time, Damien Hoyland, Chris Dean. These guys are very talented young players, and they've gone through the 7 circuit, and they're improving players, and it's obvious to see. However, that obviously is a very small quota of players. There's been a lot of chat on the blog in particular about a 3rd pro team, or a re-evaluation of the semi-pro leagues. What do you think is the more viable option? Because obviously either way it would be either a massive investment or a massive restructuring. Do you have a say on what it should be?
Yeah, first of all, just a quick one on the 7. Scotland have announced, as you mentioned, those 2 players, and also you can add to that Jamie Farndale, who's not going out as part of the Scotland 7s, but he's going to be playing in the Hong Kong 10s tournament. But this team, go into Hong Kong and Tokyo, the next 2 legs on the circuit, and they face the likes of New Zealand and Australia, in the same pool. But yeah, Damien Hoyland, hugely impressed out in Wellington. But why did Scottish Rugby bring him back and not play him in Vegas? They flew him back from Wellington to play in a Pro 12 game for Edinburgh against Ospreys. Hardly touched the ball, and I just see the likes of that sort of decision making just wrong. I don't have a clear answer about where whether there should be investment in a 3rd team, but I have mentioned the fact that London Scottish may well be that 3rd team. There's already a process there, but I just don't know the financial implications and how that would work. But it's worth exploring. But I was suggesting, there was an idea yesterday that was suggested to me, was that the academy players should form 2 teams within the Premiership, and those academy players play week in, week out, and perhaps then occasionally have the odd ringer that comes from the 2 professional teams, because what we need is our professional rugby players to be playing rugby. And if that then gives them a break into the top division, then the umbilical cord, which is the attachment from the clubs to Edinburgh and Glasgow to Scottish Rugby, to the Scotland team, could then therefore be repaired, because at the moment, I've always said that I just think at the moment it's detached. So that's a potential option, that we look to a smaller Premiership division, but we introduce either 1 or 2 academy teams to that process, and they get to play against other top club players. Whether that's an intense enough structure or not, I just don't know, but an interesting one to consider.
Okay, we're going to jump a bit ahead now to the World Cup. Now, obviously, certainly on the blog and my own opinion, there's been a lot of debate about almost an enigma at number 8. A few years ago now, it seemed that Johnny Beattie was the answer to this, a big ball-playing, bustling number 8. But this tournament, in my opinion, certainly, he's completely underperformed. Now, in the World Cup, we're obviously going to have Josh Strauss, who's now a kilted Safa, coming over to play. What do you think he's the answer? I mean, he's had 4 Man of the Match awards for Glasgow this year, and everyone at Scotstoun loves him. What do you think? Do you think he is the answer to our number 8 problem?
Yes, he is. He gives you a front foot ball, he gives you front foot option, and he'll be playing in the World Cup. Simple as that. I'm not too sure of the exact date that he qualifies, but it's I've got a feeling it sits around about August sometime. But I can see him involved in the squad without any shadow of doubt. It was great to see Dave Denton get back in the game and suddenly get to the form that brought him his first international cap. So, but undoubtedly Strauss will be there. You've also got Willem Nel, who's going to give you options, and he continues to impress at Edinburgh. He's quite a solid character, and we're just going to have to accept the fact that the modern options of project players, call them what you will, kilted Kiwis, kilted Safas, is just part of the game. Whether I agree with it or not, I probably don't, because a guy's just doing his job at the end of the day, and 3 years later he can play for his country, adopted country. And it was interesting, watching yesterday, or the game against France, Italy, where Scott Spedding, being South African, Rory Crockett, both involved in the French team, no hint of a French accent, but was sitting there wearing a French jersey. It means a lot for him to play, but doesn't have that integrity, I think. And I sort of look back to the teams I played against, and you just didn't have that situation happening within World Rugby, and it's different. But unfortunately, I've got to accept it. But there's a lot of water to go under the bridge before Scotland ultimately settle on their ultimate team. So, but the key game, like it was 4 years ago, Scotland were in a pool with England and Argentina. The key for me was always beating Argentina, and they lost that game, and that put them under pressure for the final game. The key game in this World Cup, again a strong pool: Scotland, South Africa, USA and Japan. Well, we're hoping that USA and Japan are dispatched, but the Samoa game is hugely important for Scotland, and they've got to overcome that particular hurdle. And if they do, then they've got an opportunity to get to the quarterfinals, because I don't think at this moment in time they're good enough to beat South Africa. But you never know. A wet St James's Park on a cold October evening might well produce a result that all of Scottish rugby is looking for.
Mentioning Scott Spedding, I think one of my favourite moments of the tournament was listening to Eddie Butler pull off Scott Spedding in a beautifully crisp French accent. I thought that was quite a highlight, especially with the whole debate about these project players. Anyway, build onto the World Cup. As you said, Samoa is a massive game, and in the past they've given us some really tight affairs. Granted, our overall record still looks quite good, but I don't think that really displays the whole picture. I mean, in South Africa, Scotland got exactly what they deserved. They were beaten, and it probably should have been a lot wider gap. What do we need to do as a squad? What does Cotter need to do to make sure we beat them? Because really, we should be beating Samoa regularly, comfortably. But what do you think they need to do? How do they need to change their game plan to play against that Samoan team?
Well, I think we're back to a similar sort of question that you posed earlier on about Scotland's performances in the Six Nations haven't been good enough. So it's about continuing some of the good things that have gone on. There will be changes to the squad. These players will go through massive strength and conditioning programs to get them into the best physical shape. They're playing France and Italy, in terms of warm-up test matches. So it's just going to have to be, more. When I say more of the same, I don't mean it more of the same. It's just things are going to have to change within the camp. But what gives you confidence is winning international rugby. So if they can win some games, that's what's going to give them the confidence as they go into the World Cup. And they play Italy, I think, home and away in actual fact. So if that's your yardstick from the Six Nations, well, you'd expect 2 wins and 2 very solid wins, and to go and beat France in their own backyard and play some blooming good rugby. Now, that gives you... So suddenly Scotland could get into this World Cup with 3 good wins behind them. Now, is that yet another indication of a false dawn? So perhaps it might be, but I think what we're going to accept is that Scotland will win some games. But we just can't afford to continue to lose games that we're in a position to win and to lose them softly. So there's a lot of pressure on this team. So let's wait and see. I can't predict what's going to happen, but there will be changes to the squad, as we've talked about, with the likes of Josh Strauss coming in, the likes of Johnny Gray, Richie Gray, really got to shine through, and maybe there's an opportunity where a player suddenly starts to produce some magnificent rugby, and that's up to the coaches to bring the best out of those players. So, fingers crossed, and I'm thoroughly looking forward to it. I'll be working with ITV and commentating a lot of games. So I think it's going to be a great World Cup down in England, and really looking forward to it.
Aren't we all? And especially to have a World Cup so close to home as well. It's been a while. You mentioned briefly earlier the USA and Japan games. Now, recently we've played both of them, and the wins were far from convincing. Even though the scoreboard started to run away in that Japan game, they were not. I think it would be harsh to say that they were a tier, like, as far away from Scotland as some teams seem to be. I mean, Japan have been climbing up the rankings rapidly in recent times. How do you think Scotland need to approach those games? Because they're no longer just teams that are going to give up after 40 minutes. How would you like to see Cotter go about the Scotland team's sort of sight going into those games?
Same sort of question as before. Is just carrying out your processes. You're right. I'm not dismissing the fact that USA and Japan are just going to be put to the side and let's get on with it. They're not. These teams are going to become hugely prepared. Remember, a Japanese team beat Wales a couple of years ago. I appreciate that Wales had a stack of folk on that Lions tour. It doesn't matter. The record book says that Japan beat Wales. They are good rugby players. They are conditioned well. Eddie Jones is an international coach of high repute, ex-Wallaby, of course. And USA, they are going to be at their fittest. The squad's going to be well prepared. There's a lot of experienced players, like Chris Wiles, for example, who plays at Saracens, who are going to bring that experience to bear during World Cup. Scotland are going to realise there's a lot of pressure rugby going to be played. And I sound like a broken record, but it's eliminating the mistakes, staying on the game plan, dogging it out. 20 minutes to go. You're not going to rattle up 30, 40 points in the first half. But the opportunity is, if you take your chances and you wear down your opposition, you gradually build on that pressure. And it's about Scotland creating pressure on those teams to then take their chances. It's not playing a loose structure of rugby. So, again, I hark back to my sort of Rugby World Cup playing days, and you just have to go out and deliver. And we played against the likes of a Tongan side, Zimbabwe, Japan. You call them minnows if you want. I played against Western Samoa in a quarter final, and probably Scotland. We had to deliver one of our best performances to overcome a rampant Western Samoan side, and that's what's required at that level. The ultimate performance, and that's what we all seek as sportsmen.
Right. Well, that's about me all out of questions now. I'm sorry for keeping you going there, Scott. I'd just like to thank Scott for taking the time to come in and speak to us. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we wish Scotland all the best for Saturday and beyond. And just a final note from Scott. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much. And of course, anybody who does happen to listen to this, keep tweeting all about this fantastic rugby blog. And, we wish you all very well, and keep supporting this great game of ours. And as we move through to the latter end of the seasons on the Guinness Pro 12 with Glasgow and Edinburgh, there's also European competitions for Edinburgh, of course, who are in the European Champions Cup. Challenge Cup, I should say, isn't it? It's the Challenge Cup, a quarter-final against London Irish, and then the famous Melrose Sevens again, Sevens in May in Scotstoun. So keep supporting Scottish rugby. There's a lot of good things, but of course the main thing is seeing this international team of ours winning well. Thanks very much.